Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge the sober tenor surrounding this debate and the words of the Leader of the Opposition and the member for Regina Douglas Park. Of course, we all need to work together on this very serious, very important issue. That said, I must say that the motion before us amounts to sloganeering and relies on base cliches that, quite frankly, are completely inaccurate, Mr. Speaker. Our record is very clear on domestic and interpersonal violence and violence against women and girls, and it's very definitive and very honourable in terms of its commitments. The very premise of this motion put forward by the member for Douglas Park is false, that our overall plan does not include the financial commitment, the backup, to address this extremely important issue of violence against women. What then, Mr. Speaker, of the $11 million, $11 million allocated this year to develop and operate 43 services that address interpersonal violence and abuse, delivered by 33 community-based organizations in 17 communities across this province? What then of the $500,000 provided by the Ministry of Justice for the startup and the ongoing operation of a 24-hour residential crisis service in Melfort, House of Hope, that will help women and their children in the Northeast who are experiencing interpersonal violence and abuse? The opening of this emergency shelter was this week, June 13, Monday.
Hear, hear.
Tragically, it was almost ready in November 2014 before it burnt to the ground. But it was full steam ahead, again, to get it up and running. And here we are, up and running. It's the first transition home in Saskatchewan since 1989, Mr. Speaker. I was chatting just the other day with the member from Melfort, and he was saying this motion comes this week, of all possible weeks, because he is so proud, as we all are, of this project and of our cooperation. So proud of our project and of the cooperation with Northeast Outreach and Support Services in Melfort. And he told me with some degree of emotion about some of the stories he's heard of women in crisis in and around the community of Melfort, particularly where children are concerned, where children are involved. And he told me how important this transition house is to the community of Melfort, of course, to victims above all, but also to him personally as a representative of that community who has lobbied so tirelessly for this, honourably and committedly, Mr. Speaker. What too of the fact that this government went above and beyond the recommendations of the Poverty Reduction Strategy Advisory Group back in 2014? That advisory group included Dr. Ryan Miley, no less, social activist, one-time leadership contender for the NDP. It was our government, it was the Minister for Social Services, not the advisory group, not Dr. Miley, that included interpersonal violence and domestic abuse as a root cause of poverty worthy of future direction. Because it is a root cause. There are known links between being disenfranchised or unemployed or under stress and abusing. Where economies are stronger, where people feel they have more purpose, domestic violence rates tend to fall. And of course, where women and children don't have to pick up and leave and put their lives and their schooling and maybe their jobs on hold while they stay in a temporary shelter, for example, that too becomes a poverty producer. We took that direction for the future, Mr. Speaker. Take Bills 144 and 152, amendments to the Victims of Domestic Violence Act, that came into effect just last year. These amendments enhance the ability of police and of the justice system to engage, to activate protective measures for victims. As well, importantly, the Saskatchewan Domestic Violence Death Review process is being implemented this very summer. Panel members were announced today. Because we have been moved and stirred to action as a government to address the 14 tragic cases of domestic violence-related homicides in this province in 2014 and 2015. They cut close to home. The purpose of this review will be to identify consistent themes in domestic death cases and to make recommendations to prevent them in the future. Can we do more? Of course we can. always. But we have acted too. Consider the banners surrounding some of our major initiatives. Province enhances protection for victims of violence abuse. That was April 2015. Province confirms commitment to review domestic violence deaths. October 2015. Province launches powerful campaign against sexual violence and abuse. Also October 2015. And this was following the proclamation for the second year in a row of Awareness-Raising Violence Prevention Week, Mr. Speaker. I remember that public awareness campaign. It was very effective. It was called Who Will You Help? And it was about how everyone has a role to play when it comes to preventing, in this case, sexual assault. It ran on TV, in theaters, on social media, where it garnered 1 million views. And when I saw some of these PSAs, I recalled personally how I once called the police when I was a student at McGill. Every day I was home around the supper hour, I would hear a husband come home to the apartment below me, and he would start to yell and to scream at his wife, and things would escalate to the point my mind raced. At first I left an anonymous note on their door, and then one particularly bad night I decided to call the police. And I remember the police came to my door following their visit to the apartment below because I had placed the call. And then, as it turned out, the couple in question, including the man in question, came up a few days later, ostensibly to apologize, but I still sometimes wonder whether that was really appropriate, that my apartment number was passed along to them. But at any rate, the yelling did cease, at least for as long as I lived there, which was something. I also recall volunteering to provide legal advice to a woman at a Saskatoon shelter back when I was a law student. And I recall the fear more than anything, the disorientation, the distraction in her demeanor. She was trying to listen to whatever strategy I was proposing, but really her mind was, quite understandably, on what she feared was only temporary peace. I continue to donate toys and books to that shelter, and I often wonder, what happened to that lady? I hope she is well, and that she found more than just temporary peace. Of course, there's no question that the high rate of violence, particularly in our north, Mr. Speaker, affects all communities, and prevention, reduction, they are everyone's responsibility. Governments, individuals, communities, they all play a part. But every single case of abuse and death from abuse is a tragedy, and we will work hard to make them avoidable tragedies. In terms of rural and northern Saskatchewan, the Ministry of Justice currently supports domestic violence services run by community agencies in 17 communities. In northern Saskatchewan specifically, the Ministry of Justice funds a program through North Sask Victim Services in La Ronge specifically designed to help northerners leave dangerous situations safely and quickly. Police-based victim services programs are available across the province. All RCMP and municipal police services are ready and able to help with situations of domestic violence. There are 24-hour crisis lines available that help victims create plans for their safety. The Ministry of Justice has also provided training on trauma through webinars and face-to-face meetings with some 700 individuals. Regina and Saskatoon provide access for offenders to earlier programming and to increase victim safety. No fewer than 14 residential services for women and their children have been licensed or re-licensed under this government through the Residential Services Act by the Ministry of Justice. Bottom line, there is never a more open demonstration of commitment than in the practical, the application of action. We are working to find realistic and effective solutions. That's what the Minister for Social Services called it following our government's announcement of the domestic violence death review process. Not just words, not inflammatory words, but action. Action on an issue that continues to be a major one, not only here in Saskatchewan, but in Canada and around the world, Mr. Speaker. But that it's submitted that we have failed to address the issue of domestic violence and violence against women and girls and refused to implement a plan to prevent and reduce it. This after the Justice Minister has said attitudes that legitimize sexual violence and misogyny are an ongoing safety to the safety of our province's women and girls. That is not refusal. That is not looking the other way. Our record, our actions clearly show the contrary. The member for Regina Douglas Park, the Leader of the Opposition, their engagement with this issue is to be commended. We must all work together, of course, but my suggestion would be to withdraw this contrived motion, which I will not be supporting, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.